The first chill of morning clung to the cobblestones of Serwyn Court, mist curling at the hem of the capital's great marble pillars. There was silence, a kind only possible before dawn, before the court guards began dragging chains across the tiled floor and a quiet woman with ash-brown hair was led in by torchlight. Leona Verres did not look like a poisoner. She looked like a widow, or a painter, or a village healer who'd once laughed in gardens and knew the name of every flower. Her wrists, too slender for shackles, were bound by soft rope. Her gown, a faded green, had patches at the elbows. She did not struggle or cry. She only walked with small, deliberate steps. The court chamber loomed with unforgiving symmetry, judges at the front, scribes to the right, nobles to the left, and behind them a sea of pale faces. She knew no one in the crowd. No one stood for her. A cough broke the silence. Then the bailiff's voice rang through the hall. Leona Verres of Veridel Hollow, you are charged with the murder of Lord Andric Talvin by means of botanical poison derived from wyvern ivy, administered through his evening wine on the 29th night of Lur month. The word sounded strange. Foreign. She'd spent her life pressing tinctures for fever and brewing cordial for spring headaches, not slipping venom into nobles' drinks. Her hands had made healing poultices, not murder. Leona looked up toward the judges. They sat behind a carved bench that spanned the width of the chamber, their faces lit from below by golden lanterns. In the middle sat Magistrate Halwen, the eldest. His white hair was curled into rings, powdered and severe. We know what you are, he said. You have the hands of a herbalist. The poison came from wyvern ivy, a plant banned in the capital for decades. Yet we found it blooming behind your cottage wall. I did not use it, she said quietly. Then who did? Halwen's voice was sharp. We found the root bundled in your cellar. The Lord Steward swore that you brought wine to the manor that very evening. Your connection to the Talvin household is well documented. Explain that. Leona opened her mouth, and nothing came. She'd spoken the truth 100 times, in the dark cell beneath the court, in the small hours of the night when rats scrabbled against stone. But no one had listened. I brought wine, yes, she said finally. It was a gift. He was kind to my late husband, once. I had no cause to hurt him. The court murmured. The noble section shifted uneasily. She could see the Talvin crest on their cuffs, a silver hawk on midnight blue. The whole family was there. Except the one who mattered most. The dead one. She closed her eyes and inhaled slowly. Andric Talvin had been a difficult man. That much was true. He was prideful, arrogant, unkind to most. But not to her. Not always. In her village, people spoke in hushed tones of the day he visited the Verres apothecary. Tall, regal, adorned in blue velvet. He had been bleeding, arm gashed open after a hunting trip gone wrong, and she'd cleaned the wound with her own hands. Not a servant. Not a maid. Her. That day, he had called her remarkable. She had hated him for it later. For using that word so casually, like it meant nothing. But in the moment, it had mattered. And that was the thing she couldn't say now, not in front of these sneering men. That once, she had loved him. That once, she had believed he saw something more in her than calloused hands and bitter herbs. But love meant nothing in a court of law. After the opening charges, testimony began. One by one, the Talvin staff were called to speak. First was Harlan, the steward. She came the evening Lord Andric died, he said. Brought a bottle of elderberry wine. Said it was from her cellar, from the old stock. And did anyone else drink it? The magistrate asked. No, my lord. He drank it alone, in his study. And how long after did he die? Not an hour. He started seizing at supper. Leona sat silently as the words fell over her like rain. She had nothing to counter him with. She had no alibi, no proof. Only a memory of his voice, soft in the dark, "You shouldn't bring me gifts, Leona. People will talk." She remembered laughing. She remembered brushing his sleeve by accident. And she remembered the way he looked at her, like he could almost see through her. That wasn't poison. That was longing. The second witness was a stable boy named Rowan. "She had the plant in her garden," he said nervously, fidgeting with his tunic. "I saw it once. It looked just like the one in the books. Wyvern ivy has those dark silver tips. That's what they say." "She never told you what it was?" "No. But she warned me not to touch it. Said it could burn skin." That part was true. She had said that. But she had also said it was a specimen she kept sealed, dried for research, never brewed. It was rare. Illegal to grow, yes, but not to own in small quantities. Not unless it was used. And it hadn't been. Not by her. The final witness was the court herbalist, Master Elvener, an old man who smelled of mint oil and pride. "I examined the residue in the wine glass myself," he said. "It matched with wyvern ivy extract, boiled and reduced over 3 days. Only an expert would know the process. This was no accident. This was deliberate poisoning." "You are certain it was not a mistake? Not accidental ingestion?" "Absolutely not. The poison was refined. Lethal. A child could not have made it. Only a master of herbs. Or someone with a death wish." The implication hung heavy in the air. Leona bowed her head. When the magistrate finally turned to her again, the silence in the court was suffocating. "You may speak," Halwen said. "One last time. Before we decide." Leona's fingers trembled in her lap. Her voice was raw when she answered. "I did not kill him. I cared for him, once. Not enough to be blind, but enough to grieve." "Grieve?" The magistrate arched a brow. "You claim to mourn a man you murdered." "I mourn the truth being buried. I mourn being the only one who still remembers it." The magistrate leaned forward. "And what truth is that?" "That Lord Andric Talvin was not meant to die alone. And not by my hands. There was another. Someone with more to lose. Someone no one speaks of. But I saw her. The day before. In the manor gardens. With him." "Who?" Halwen snapped. But she said nothing more. Because the woman she spoke of was nobility. And Leona knew what happened when commoners accused the highborn. Even when it was true. The court was adjourned. Judgment would come with morning. That night, in her cell, Leona pressed her fingers against the cold stone wall and whispered the name she had not dared to say aloud in years. Finian. Her son. Her first and only child. Gone since the war. Left when he was 16, wild with music and rage, desperate to escape the smallness of their village and the shadow of his father's drinking. She hadn't heard from him in 7 years. Not since he wrote one last letter, "Don't wait for me. I'll be someone else by the time I return." But now, in the dark, she whispered his name again and again, like a spell. Somewhere in the kingdom, she believed, he was still alive. Still writing words that meant something. Still awake under the same moon. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would find his way back. Before it was too late. Outside the city walls, far beyond the towers and smoke, a young man rode through the forest on a borrowed horse. His hair was black as ink, tied at the nape. A battered lute clung to his back. In his pocket was a letter he'd received too late. A summons. From a village magistrate. Your mother stands trial for noble murder. Sentence, death. Finian Varys had not been home in years. But now, as the moon broke through clouds and lit the road ahead, he gritted his teeth and kicked the horse harder. He had left a boy. He would return a storm. The forest air clung to Finian's throat, thick with the scent of rain-drenched pine and wet soil. His boots were soaked to the ankle, the path winding, more roots than road now. But he didn't slow. Not even when the horse collapsed a mile from the city gates. Not when his breath came in sharp bursts and his chest ached with a quiet panic he hadn't known he could still feel. He hadn't thought of home in years. Not the scent of rosemary steeped in his mother's soaps, not the curling vines that grew wild over the garden gate, not the way she hummed when she cooked, even if no one listened. He had buried all of it. Rewritten himself in poems and plays, gone from town to town as a traveling bard, living on applause and cheap cider. But now, home was not a memory. It was a sentence. A courtroom. A mother waiting to die. And the guilt was unbearable. He entered the city at dusk. The walls of Serwyn were slick with mist, the torches at the guard posts flickering gold against the grey. A few vendors were still open, selling roasted chestnuts, ink scrolls, fortune charms. Finn passed them like a ghost. He asked directions only once, to the court tower. No one looked him in the eye. The court clerk eyed him with suspicion when he gave his name. Varys, she repeated. The herbalist's son. Finn nodded. She's already been tried. I know. She's sentenced at dawn. I know. The clerk squinted. You're late. Finn almost laughed. Of course he was. His whole life was made of late arrivals and broken promises. I need to see her, he said. Tonight. Before they take her. She hesitated. Then slid a rusted iron key across the desk. Third cell on the left. Be quick. And don't expect a warm welcome. She hasn't spoken a word since the magistrates left. Finn took the key in silence and walked toward the prisoner hall, heart thudding against his ribs. He saw her before she saw him. She sat on the edge of the stone bench, her back to the bars, her hair longer than he remembered, streaked with silver. Her hands rested in her lap. One held a sprig of dried lavender. He didn't know where she'd gotten it. Mother, he said. She didn't move. Leona. She turned her head slowly, eyes rimmed with fatigue. For a moment, there was nothing. No recognition. Then. Finn. His throat clenched. I came as soon as I could. She stood. Her ropes were gone, no need to restrain a woman sentenced to die. But she looked smaller than he remembered. Thinner. Weathered, like paper left in the rain. I thought you were dead, she said softly. I almost was, he replied. A few times. They stared at each other. Then, slowly, she stepped closer and reached through the bars. Her fingers brushed his. I dreamt of you last night, she whispered. You were standing on a stage, wearing a crown of violets. Finn gave a hoarse laugh. Not quite. The closest I got was a tavern in Darsin where they threw roses because I rhymed fate with late. She smiled. Just faintly. Then the smile faded. You shouldn't have come back, she said. Not to this. I had to. There's nothing you can do. That's not true. Leona looked away. The law is made by people who don't see people. Only names. Only rules. I know that. I've lived in their cities. She shook her head. This is different. This time, they want blood. Finn leaned in. Then I'll give them a story. That night, he didn't sleep. He went straight from the court to the Rosevale Inn, a broken old place with ivy in the windows and creaking stairs. He rented a room and locked himself inside, scattering ink and parchment across the bed. He began writing. Not a poem. Not a play. A confession. But not his. He had no proof, yet, but he had suspicion. In his travels, he'd heard the name Talvin more times than he could count. The noble house, once rising, was now quietly falling. There were whispers of infighting, of an heir lost to scandal. Andric had made enemies. Including, Finn suspected, the one person no one dared to name, Mirel Talvin. The nobleman's cousin. And once, his betrothed. Except, she had disappeared. Days before the trial. Vanished. Finn's mind raced. He remembered, years ago, overhearing his mother talking with a woman in the garden. A tall woman with a soft southern accent. Elegant. Unmarked by war. You can't stay here. That was what his mother had said. If they find you, Mirel. He hadn't understood it then. But now, it clicked. Mirel had loved Andric. But not in a way the family would approve. And if she feared scandal more than grief, she had a motive. By morning, Finn had a plan. First, he returned to the court. Asked for access to the case records. Denied. Then, to the city garden registry. Asked for a list of who had purchased or sold wyvern ivy in the last year. Also denied. Finally, he went to the street sellers, the black markets tucked behind the stables, the ones who sold illegal roots under perfume stalls and rare incense. It took him until sundown. But then, finally, a breakthrough. A woman with copper hair and a face tattoo of a crescent moon recognized the plant name. I sold dried ivy last month, she said, lighting a thin roll of sweet leaf. To a girl. Pale. Pretty. Looked nervous. Said it was for ceremonial use. Did she give a name? No. But she paid with a silver crest. Talvin family. I don't ask questions. Finn felt the world tilt. Mirel. She had bought the poison. The court would never accept word from a market seller. So Finn did what he had always done. He crafted words like weapons. He wrote a letter. A public letter. Not to the court, but to the city. He signed it as a bard, not as a son. He disguised his voice. Let the emotion burn just enough to singe the edges. He told the story not of a murderer, but of a mother. A woman whose only crime was helping a friend who needed silence. A woman who had given everything and now sat alone while the real betrayer vanished behind wealth and title. He had the broadsheet printed in secret and handed out copies at the main square by lantern light. By midnight, the city was whispering. At dawn, Leona was brought to the execution chamber. It was not a gallows. Not yet. It was a prelude, a ceremonial reading of the sentence before the public vote. Executions in Serwyn required one final audience decision. Just tradition. But tradition could be bent. The chamber filled slowly. Nobles arrived first. Then merchants. Then citizens. Whispers rippled through them. Had you seen the broadsheet? Is it true? Did the Talvin girl really vanish? Then, a murmur at the back. Someone walking down the aisle. Finn. He wore his best coat, black with a red sash, ink stains still on the cuffs. He carried no sword. Only a paper scroll. The magistrate frowned. You again. I request permission to speak. This is no court for. I bring new evidence. And a confession. The crowd gasped. Finn unrolled the scroll. He didn't read it. He looked up. My name is Finian Varys. Son of the accused. And a bard of the Free Guild. I've seen 100 lies dressed in poetry. But this one is dressed in power. He turned toward the crowd. You've heard the official story. Now hear the one no one dares tell. My mother didn't kill Lord Talvin. She sheltered the one who did. Out of pity. Out of guilt. Out of a loyalty that nearly cost her everything. He let the silence bloom. She protected a woman named Mirel Talvin. A woman whose love affair with Andric would have ruined the family name. When Andric refused to leave the court for her, Mirelle panicked. She poisoned him. My mother found out. And tried to cover it, out of compassion. The magistrates stirred. This is slander, one hissed. No, Finn said. This is what your court forgot. That sometimes the truth doesn't come in coin or seal. It comes in pain. And silence. And shame. He raised the scroll. This is a copy of the market registry. Wyvern ivy sold to a buyer who paid with a silver Talvin crest. Cross-reference it. Ask the right questions. You'll find her. Leona stared at her son. He looked taller than she remembered. And older. But in that moment, he looked like hope. The judges paused the sentencing. Investigation would follow. Leona was taken from the execution hall, not to a cell, but to the court archives. A kind of waiting room. Finn followed. They sat in silence. Finally, she whispered. You wrote about me. He smiled faintly. I never stopped. The ink on Cale Darner's fingers had not dried. He wiped it on the inside of his sleeve before anyone noticed, then returned to copying the magistrate's order into the court ledger. His pen scratched softly as whispers echoed through the gallery outside, murmurs about the bard who interrupted the sentence, the confession, the delay. Delay. That word had never meant much to Cale before. A pause. A procedural hiccup. A red blot on parchment. But now it meant something else. Time. Time for the truth to break the surface. Time for him to decide what he was willing to give up. Cale had grown up in the court libraries. The son of a low merchant, he'd earned his place through precision and silence. He spoke little, read everything, and did what was asked. He recorded death warrants, marriage decrees, property transfers. It had always been simple. Detached. Until the Varys trial. Until he saw the name Finian Varys scribbled into the attendance book in rushed ink. He remembered the name. And not from the case files. He remembered it from a night 2 years ago, in a tavern on the northern promenade. A young bard with ink on his collar had stood on a crate and sung verses so raw Cale had forgotten how to breathe. After the performance, Cale had waited behind the others to thank him. Finn had smiled, not wide, not showy, but real. They had spoken for 10 minutes. That was all. 10 minutes. But it had lingered. Long after the songs faded. Now, the same man was standing in the middle of a legal firestorm, shouting truths no one wanted to hear. And Cale was in a position to change everything. If he dared. That night, long after the court had closed, Cale remained in the scribe chamber. Most clerks had gone. Only the ticking of the wall lanterns filled the silence. He opened a hidden drawer in his desk. Inside was a folder he wasn't supposed to have. He had copied it for himself the night after Leona Varys was first charged. It contained records of noble correspondences, sealed letters that passed through the court's inner post. One was addressed from MT, dated 3 days before Lord Andric's death. The contents were vague. Carefully worded. But one line had caught his eye. If I cannot have the future I was promised, then none of us will. Poison is kinder than shame. He had never dared report it. But now, it was evidence. His hands shook as he tucked the letter into his coat. In the morning, he stood before the magistrates. I request audience, he said, his voice steady but too low. I have new evidence in the Varys case. State your purpose, Magistrate Halwyn said, clearly annoyed. You are not a lawyer. No, my lord. But I am a scribe. I manage private correspondences. I saw something. The magistrates leaned forward. Cale handed over the copy of Mirelle Talvin's letter. I believe the late Lord Talvin was being threatened, not by Leona Varys, but by someone inside his own household. This letter came through the post room 3 days before his death. The handwriting matches Noble Morel Talvin's prior records. Halwyn narrowed his eyes. And you withheld this? I was afraid. Afraid of what? Cale paused. To be honest, afraid of Matring. That stopped the court. The other magistrates blinked, unsure whether to be insulted or moved. Halwyn read the letter in silence. Then passed it down. When he looked up, his voice was sharper. This changes the trajectory. Thank you, Master Darner. This will be added to the investigation. Cale bowed. Then turned to leave. But he did not go back to his desk. He went to find Finn. He found him in the court gardens, pacing. Finn looked up in surprise when Cale appeared. You, he said. You were at the trial. I'm at all of them, Cale replied. But yours. I couldn't watch in silence anymore. He handed Finn a copy of the letter. Finn read it, slowly. His brow furrowed. She wrote this, he whispered. She really did it. Cale nodded. This confirms motive. Threat. And foreknowledge. Your mother was protecting someone. Not framing herself. Finn looked up, eyes shadowed with disbelief. Why would you help me? Cale hesitated. Then shrugged. Sometimes we see people in passing. And we remember them longer than we should. Finn stared at him, a half-laugh catching in his throat. You're joking. No, Cale said, voice softer. 2 years ago. A tavern near the North Promenade. You read something about stars and... I think it was love. Finn blinked. I was drunk. I wasn't. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Finn shook his head and smiled, not mockingly, not cruelly. Just, tired. Well, he said, I suppose I owe you a drink. Cale's ears warmed. Let's save your mother first. Then we'll toast. Finn offered his hand. Cale took it. It lingered a second too long. Neither pulled away. Over the next 2 days, they worked together. Cale helped draft a formal petition to the investigative panel. Finn tracked down Morel Talvin's old handmaid, who had since left service. The woman agreed to speak, quietly, and off the record. She was obsessed, she told them, wringing her apron. With Lord Andric. And scared. She said if anyone found out, she'd be exiled. Did she ever mention poison? Cale asked. The woman paused. She asked me once if you could die from wyvern ivy. I thought she meant old stories. Fairy tales. But she was serious. Her hands were shaking. It was enough. Finn and Cale returned to court the next morning with the handmaid in tow. The judges called an emergency hearing. Leona was brought back into the chamber. When she saw Finn and Cale standing side by side, her brow creased in confusion. Cale offered her a quiet nod. She nodded back. As the handmaid gave her testimony, murmurs rippled through the nobles. One of the Talvin cousins stood and walked out. Another tried to object, but the magistrate silenced him. When the letter was read aloud, Morel's words plain and terrible, the mood changed. This was no longer about a healer. It was about the House of Talvin. And their secrets. After the court recessed, Finn and Cale walked alone down the side corridor. I think they're going to release her, Cale said. Finn didn't speak right away. He stopped, then turned slowly. You didn't have to help. You could have stayed behind your desk. I could have, Cale said. But you didn't. I didn't. Finn stepped closer. There was something in his eyes, hesitation, uncertainty, something deeper. You saved her, he whispered. No, Cale said. You did. I just helped push the door. Finn studied him. Then, very softly. Would you stay? After all this? I mean, if I stayed, too. Cale smiled. I've never had a reason to stay anywhere. Finn's voice was low. Maybe now you do. And for the first time in years, Cale believed that might be true. It lay now in her satchel, tarnished silver shaped like a hawk's wing. She hadn't dared sell it, too traceable, but couldn't bring herself to throw it away either. Not when it still smelled faintly of Endrick's cologne. Not when it was the last piece she had of him. She pressed a gloved hand to the side of her hood and stepped deeper into the crowd. The city had changed. Serwyn was louder, sharper. There were new bridges across the outer canal, and the bell tower above the court no longer rang at evenfall. But the garden walls were still the same. Ivy still curled along the southern walls like soft green lace. And just beyond the marble pillars, behind torchlit arches. They were reading her name. Not aloud. Not yet. But in whispers. She heard it. Mirel Talvin. She vanished after the poisoning. Did she love him? Did she hate him? They didn't know. No one did. Except Leona Veres. Mirel found her way to the inn near the edge of the southern quarter, a discreet place with green shutters and no questions asked. She rented the smallest room and kept her face hidden even from the housekeeper. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. Not since the letter surfaced. Not since the court bard, Leona's son, read it aloud in the judgment hall. She had written those words. Recklessly. Stupidly. But never meant for them to be sent. That damn scribe must have copied them. Or worse, someone at the manor post had betrayed her. And now? Now she stood at the edge of a decision no Talvin had ever been allowed to make. To confess. Or to run. On the third night, she lit a candle and opened her satchel. Inside was a letter. The final one Endrick had written her. It was never sent, either. She had found it in the drawer of his study the day after his death, when she'd returned, frantic, confused, hoping he'd changed his mind. The letter read. Mirel. I cannot marry you. I cannot live this lie. We were fire, once. But now we are only smoke. And smoke will suffocate us both. I'm sorry. Endrick. She had read it 100 times. She knew what it meant. He had ended it. Quietly. Politely. He had loved her, but not enough to burn for her. So she had chosen poison. Not just out of heartbreak. Out of pride. Rage. Survival. Her whole life had been arranged like a ballroom, every step mapped, every partner chosen. And when she realized she'd be left behind, with nothing but ruined reputation and no heir to anchor her, she had acted. Not wisely. But swiftly. And now a healer sat behind bars for her crime. A woman who once treated her wounds without charge. Who gave her tea when she was too anxious to eat. Who said, love doesn't mean you don't fear. It means you stay, even when you do. Leona had known everything. And she had kept the secret. Until now. Mirel dressed plainly, dust-colored cloak, no jewelry, no perfume. Her hair was bound tight and hidden beneath her hood. She walked past the court gates just after sunset, when the light was too dim to see her clearly, and slipped through the servant entrance she had once used as a girl. The guard stopped her only briefly. I have testimony, she said, voice flat but clear. For the case of Leona Veres. The guard blinked, confused. Name? She exhaled. Mirel Talvin. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. He didn't call for backup. He didn't raise an alarm. He simply opened the inner gate. They brought her to the magistrate's private chambers. All 4 judges stood when she entered. Finian Very stood too, arms folded, jaw tight. So did Cale Darner, at the far side of the room, eyes flicking to her face with something unreadable in them. Mirel did not look at any of them. Only at Leona, who stood pale but upright in the corner, her wrists unbound now. "I know why I'm here," Mirel said before anyone could speak. "And I know what you expect." "Then speak it plainly," Magistrate Halwyn said. "I poisoned Lord Andric Talvin," she said. Gasps rang from the side of the room. Leona lowered her eyes. Mirel pressed on. "He left me. After promising we'd run. After years of secrecy. When I tried to speak about it, he threatened to have me exiled for slander. He said no one would believe me. That I was just another woman he danced with in shadows. And so you killed him?" "Yes," Mirel said. "I stole the poison from Leona's garden. I had seen it once before. I mixed it myself. I delivered the wine. She found out afterward. She wanted me to turn myself in. I refused. So she took the fall. She tried to cover the tracks. She told me not to come back. I didn't. I ran. She turned to Leona then. I never meant to let it go this far." Leona looked back at her with tired eyes. "Then why did you?" "Because I was afraid." Finian's voice cut through the silence. "You let my mother sit in a cell for a crime you committed. You let her nearly die." Mirel bowed her head. "Yes." Cale stepped forward. "Why now? Why return?" Mirel hesitated. Then looked toward Leona. "Because she loved someone who didn't love her back. And I did the same. But she never turned bitter. And I did. I see it now." There was a long silence. Then Halwyn raised his voice. "We will deliberate." They escorted Mirel out of the chamber, but not to a dungeon. To a holding room. The difference was small, but telling. The court believed her. And Leona was no longer alone. That evening, Finn sat alone in the Rosevale Inn, staring into a cup of warm cider. Cale joined him quietly. "She told the truth," Cale said. Finn didn't answer at first. "Then, it doesn't make it right." "No," Cale agreed. "But it makes it over." Finn looked out the window. "I still don't know what happens next." Cale sipped from his own cup. "Then maybe we write it ourselves." There was a silence between them, not empty, but warm. Then Finn said, "You once told me you remembered me from a poem. Do you remember what it was about?" Cale smiled faintly. "Two flowers. One bloomed late. The other waited." Finn looked at him. "I think I'm ready to bloom now." Cale reached across the table, slowly, and took his hand. Then let the silence hold them both. The next morning, the verdict was delivered. Leona Veres was acquitted. Mirel Talvin would be placed under house arrest pending further sentencing. The Talvin family was to be investigated for obstruction. Outside the court, people waited. When Leona stepped out, she expected whispers, stones, sneers. Instead, she heard applause. Gentle. Respectful. Some of the villagers from Veridel had come. They held signs. One woman wept openly. "You healed my son," she said. "I never forgot." Leona clutched Finn's hand as they walked past the crowd. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Mirel, from her balcony that night, saw the moon rise over Serwyn. She held the old crest in her hand. And whispered Andric's name once more. But it did not ache this time. It simply passed. Like a breath.